I received many calls, letters, and emails concerning UFO sightings and contact experiences from 1984 to 2005. A very high percentage of these reports come from the towns of Ellensville and Pine Bush in New York, located on the west side of the Hudson River. The area has always been a rich source of tales and folklore telling of small human-like beings roaming the hills, dating as far back as the 17th century. It's no wonder the author Washington Irving selected this location for his classic short story, Rip Van Winkle. I've conducted a considerable amount of research in the area and was familiar with the paranormal phenomena taking place, especially in Pine Bush. Hundreds of people were frequently gathering to share their experiences at a town hall type of meeting. On more than one occasion, I attended these get-togethers to hear credible people come forward and speak about their very incredible experiences. Besides the dozens of UFO encounters, some people said they have been abducted by aliens more than once in the middle of the night. Out of the 14 abduction cases I was able to investigate from the Pine Bush area, one stands out for its sincerity on behalf of the abductee, and the interesting fact that more than one family member has also been taken by the same intelligence. It is my opinion their experiences are very real, at least in their minds. If they were just making things up and created a hoax, well, then all of them missed their calling in life and they should have been actors. It's very rare to find an abduction experience that involves an entire family living together under one roof. This investigation was the result of a number of visits and hours of taped interviews. To give readers a good but brief understanding of this case, I will present a detailed synopsis below. The family in question are residents of Pine Bush and have lived there all their lives. The nighttime visitations of the unknown alien intelligences didn't begin until after the sightings of the giant dark triangular object known today as the Hudson Valley UFO, independently witnessed by hundreds. The family members consist of a couple in their 30s and two teenage daughters, aged 15 and 18. The entire family had seen the unknown object a total of 5 times between 1983 and 1990. But the 6th sighting was different because that time the UFO hovered above their home, showing a definite interest in them. On October 30th, 1990, the family had just finished their dinner when they received a call from an excited neighbor telling them to go outside because a UFO was headed in their direction. At first they thought it was a pre-Halloween prank, but their neighbor swore up and down that there was something out there. So they all ran out to the front porch. They looked toward the east end of town and saw a large half-circle of white lights approaching at an altitude they thought was less than 1,000 feet. It took only a moment or so for them all to realize that this was the UFO they and many others had seen many times before. As the object approached, it slowed down and stopped right over their house, after which all 4 family members heard a buzzing sound. As they looked up and watched the UFO, a brilliant beam of green light projected from the underside of the object, briefly engulfing them. After being flashed, the light shut off and the UFO continued on its westerly course, moving very slowly like it didn't care who saw it. None of the family members seemed to have any ill effects from the light, and after an excited discussion with several neighbors, they decided to head back inside. As they made their way to the front door, one neighbor yelled out, "I don't want to scare you, but it seemed like the ship was interested in you guys." No one took the comments seriously at the time, but that was to change. 4 days later, each family member felt uneasy, like something bad was about to happen. The house they lived in had 3 bedrooms, one for the couple, one for each of the daughters. At approximately 2 or 3 in the morning, the couple woke up to a humming sound in their room that seemed to be coming from the bedroom's large walk-in closet. The closet door was open, and they could see a soft green light illuminating the left side of the wall. Then, 6 small creatures walked through the walls as if it was liquid, entering the bedroom. The father attempted to get out of bed to confront the creatures, but realized he could not move his arms or legs. His wife also suffered the same strange paralysis. The creatures moved toward them, and at the moment just before both of them blacked out, they heard both daughters scream. The next thing they remember was their bedside clock reading 5:17 in the morning. Without saying a word to each other, the husband and wife jumped out of bed and ran to see if the children were all right. As they approached their bedrooms, both girls came running out screaming about aliens who came through the walls. They described the aliens as being only 3 feet tall with dark, scaly skin and large eyes. All agreed that whatever they saw looked like a cross between human and insect. During the next 6 months, the aliens would come through the walls and take all of them twice more. Each time, the incident would happen as if it was a repeat performance of the first time. Not one family member has a conscious recollection of what took place after blacking out. All 4 now sleep in the same room and have piled up furniture and other things against the bedroom walls. Since they have built this makeshift blockade, the bug-like aliens have not returned. It has been over a year since the last experience. All 4 people are hoping and praying the creatures are gone for good. I am still working on this case, but the family believes it was the interest of the UFOs that drew the attention of the aliens to them in the first place. They don't wish to investigate the case further for fear of the ship and/or creatures returning. In the summer of 2008, I arranged for the father and mother to undergo hypnosis from a qualified psychologist who has worked with me in the past. Unfortunately, the results of those sessions revealed a number of very personal things involving interactions between the aliens and the family. I am not at liberty to reveal the results at this time, but hope to do so at some point in the future. In the mid-80s, I had the privilege of investigating a close encounter of the third kind in my area. The encounter was at the tail end of the Hudson Valley UFO flap, so my name and contact information were easy to find as local papers and radio stations often carried stories on UFO sightings and my research. The witness was a 41-year-old businessman who was driving home to New Milford, Connecticut, on Route 37 near Sherman. It was December 23, 1985, and the time was close to 8:30 p.m. The man said he looked up to the sky and noticed a large object that was lit up like a Christmas tree. Multicolored lights seemed to be attached to a solid structure that was shaped like a triangle. At first, he thought it was a large jet having trouble making an emergency landing at the nearby Candlelight Airport. He knew this wasn't a good idea because the airport is a small airfield for private planes. The object was completely silent, and the man was perplexed at how an aircraft of its size could move at such a low altitude without making any noise whatsoever. The witness continued to drive but lost the object behind the hills and tree line. He made a right turn down Candlelight Road in New Milford and proceeded to the airport to get a better view of the large object that was surely going to attempt landing in the field. As he slowly drove down the road, he noticed 2 cars pulled alongside the street with their emergency flashers on. The man stopped his car and was greeted by a man and a woman who said they had also seen the object and followed it to this location. They pointed to the woods on the right and said they thought the aircraft landed in the trees. Sure enough, the woods seemed illuminated, as if something was there with its lights on. Thinking it was a downed aircraft, he said he would go investigate, and instructed the woman to find a house nearby to call the police. The other man volunteered to stay by the cars. The man went back to his car, grabbed a flashlight, and proceeded to walk to the woods toward the lighted area. After walking for about a half a mile or so, he saw what he described as a triangle-shaped aircraft hovering motionless just above the tree line. The object was dark except for one amber light on the bottom, illuminating the ground below. It wasn't a beam of light, just a light that was bright enough to light up the ground, he said. The object was about 60 feet in the air and was at least 70 feet long. At times, the object seemed to sway slightly back and forth, making the trees below it move too. The man realized this wasn't any conventional type of aircraft, and he knew it was a UFO, perhaps the same object that everyone had been seeing in the area for the past 7 years. Walking slowly and carefully through the woods toward the object, the man noticed 3 tall men standing motionless. They were dark figures, very scary, he said. I froze in my tracks and shut off my light. As he stood frozen with fear, one of the 3 figures started to walk in his direction. The man turned around and ran back toward the road, tripping on a number of thorn bushes. He was able to get up and keep running, never once looking back. When he finally reached the road, the police were just pulling up and there were at least 5 other cars along the shoulder. An officer asked him what was going on, so he told them about the object in the woods over the trees, but he didn't mention the beings. The single patrolman called for backup and walked into the woods to investigate. After about 15 minutes, another police cruiser pulled up as the officer returned from the woods, saying he didn't find anything. More recently, several people who live in the Milford area have come forth with reports of a creature that seemed to be dressed in a dark tan one-piece suit. The creature was described as being at least 7 feet tall with glowing yellow eyes. The creature had been observed in the woods and crossing back roads at night. One report that came to my attention was from a family who owned property in the area. They said the creature was observed on 2 occasions walking toward their home and then vanishing like a ghost before it reached the porch. In the summer of 2009, I received an email from an area resident who apparently had a sighting of the same creature 4 years before the UFO sighting. Below is his statement as given to me via email. I must make it very clear that this person has no idea of the content of this book or Contact of the Fifth Kind. In my opinion, his report provides more evidence of the creature's existence. In 1981, sometime in the summer, I had an experience at about 11:15 p.m. while driving on the airport road. I was on my way home when I saw something that looked like a naked woman on the road. As I neared it, my headlights shined right into its eyes, making them reflect and glow with a gold color, like a cat's eyes. As I got closer, it was apparent the figure was not naked, but wearing a tight-fitting suit that was a light beige, almost the color of pale skin. Its hands were large and there were few strands of hair on its head. It stood there in the road like it was waiting for me. All I remember from that point on is that after my car passed it, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was at the end of the airport road in the car and my hands were shaking. I made it home and went straight to bed. The next day, I took a shower and kept saying to myself that I had seen a ghost. Can you help me figure out what happened to me that night? It's apparent that more took place than the young man could remember. He experienced a certain amount of missing time. What took place during his blackout? Was he taken by some alien intelligence? Or did he simply pass out after experiencing something terrifying? All of the sightings of this creature have been at night. Were they related to the encounter of the third kind near Candlelight Airport Road? I believe so, because my research shows various types of paranormal phenomena appearing right before and right after a UFO sighting, including sightings of bizarre creatures that do not seem to be part of our reality. Throughout human history, no other transcendental being has captured the imagination in quite the same way as the mysterious leprechaun. According to most legends, leprechauns are small, mischievous, fairy-like beings that live in Ireland's hills. Believe it or not, beings of similar description have been reported over the past 2,000 years in many other countries, known by different names. To the Native Americans, they were tricksters who had magical powers and the ability to shapeshift. The tricksters delighted in playing pranks on humans, and though they were sometimes characterized as playful children, they were notoriously capricious, capable of turning into angry, malevolent creatures without cause or warning. The origins of the word leprechaun may come from the Irish word leprechaun, meaning small spirit or sprite. The concept of the leprechaun is believed to have come from ancient legends of a race of mythical inhabitants of Ireland who lived there long before the Celts arrived. In several of these myths, the race was punished for unknown reasons and were banished to another plane of existence. This story is very similar to the Middle Eastern jinn, who are said to have lived on this planet long before humankind. As Earth's first inhabitants, the jinn became very corrupt and used their powers to destroy rather than create. As a result, a higher order of beings, angels, took them out of this world and placed them in a parallel world close to our own. Like the jinn, a leprechaun will grant you 3 wishes if you make a deal with it, capture it, or help it in some way, if it's ensnared somehow. But be warned, they are tricksters. According to legend, any favors or wishes granted always turn out for the worse, leaving you with your last wish as, "I wish I never wished for anything at all." In addition to fairies, gnomes, and leprechauns, a small humanoid being that has been referred to as the Joker has been reported in the hills of Evanville and Putnam Valley. The creature is described as being a foot tall, dressed in red, and having a face like the Joker card on a playing deck of cards. The Joker creature has been seen running through the forest on the west side of the Hudson and around the mysterious stone chambers on the east. Out of the 9 reports of this creature I found, the following is one of the most interesting. The first report centers on an individual who has a history of UFO sightings and at least one abduction, wherein he was taken to a secret underground laboratory in the Hudson Valley by an alien intelligence. At this underground location, the individual says he was used for genetic experiments and was forced to have sex with an alien-human hybrid female. While resting on the couch in the basement several days later, the man noticed movement by the window. At first, he thought it was a bird, but then something knocked on the glass. He looked up and saw a small human-like figure dressed in red with a white face, green hair, and bright red lips. It paced back and forth and occasionally stopped to watch him sitting on the couch. He was dumbstruck at what he saw, and then without warning, the creature jumped through glass without breaking it and landed on his basement floor. It stopped for a second, looked at him, laughed, and ran up the stairs. The witness ran after it, and as he reached the first floor, his dog also saw the creature and took off after it. The Joker creature quickly went into the bedroom, slid under the bed like a Major League Baseball player coming into home plate, and vanished. The witness thought the strange being was sent by the aliens that abducted him to keep an eye on him, although the individual's encounters with the aliens and the UFO continued. The Joker never returned. When you think of leprechauns, Ireland's rolling hills probably come to mind, but would you believe these creatures are not restricted to that country? They've been spotted in North America, in New York State, on several occasions. Their favorite hangouts seem to be in and around the stone chambers, themselves thought to be of Celtic or pre-Celtic origin. The stone chambers of New York's Hudson Valley are the locations of a great many unexplainable occurrences ranging from UFOs to ghosts. Over the past 20 years, people who hike in the Putnam Valley area near one of these stone chambers have reported seeing a little man about 12 to 15 inches tall running in and out of the entrance of several of these stone structures. In a recent incident, summer 2005, while hiking in Falstock Park at the location of the King's Chamber, one witness saw something run out of its entrance. At first he thought it was a rabbit, but he realized it was standing upright and resembled a little man. The hiker began to chase the little man through the woods and was able to get a good look at it before it jumped into a deep pit. He described it as being a foot tall, dressed in a red one-piece skin-tight leather suit with green boots. What really shook the hiker up was before the creature dove into the pit, it stopped, looked at him, and laughed. He described its face as being pale white with large eyes and long orange hair streaked with green. Shortly after the sighting, I went out to the location where the hiker had seen the little man and found the pit he had jumped into. The pit seemed to be about 30 feet deep and was partially flooded. I had heard about notorious pits in the area connecting to a vast network of underground passages. Some local historians believe that they were dug by Dutch settlers in the 17th century as ventilation shafts for a mining operation, and others say they were dug by the Native Americans and used as meditation or burial holes. No one truly knows their origin, however, because no record of who actually dug them or what purpose they served exists. As I examined the pit, it was clear to me it would have to be explored. Soon after, I returned to the pit with a fellow researcher, armed with the proper equipment to descend into the dark hole, which, according to the local Wappinger tribe, is the home of the tricksters who protect the forest. My friend and I arrived at the pit at 9 in the morning in late September. The air was cool, the sky was cloudless and blue, and it looked like it was going to be a perfect day. The opening to the shaft was about 6 feet across, more than enough room for me to fit. My companion stayed behind just in case I got into trouble. The first task was to measure the distance down to the water. I was relieved to find that it was only 34 feet. We had more than enough rope. My main concern was the water's depth, as I really didn't want to have to swim in that cold, dark, murky underground pit. If the water was too deep, we would have to return with an inflatable raft. How did I know my way around the pit/mine shaft so well? In the mid to late 90s, I explored the lost mines of Putnam County with my investigative partner that day, Marion Horrigan. The adventures proved to be plenty dangerous, but they prepared me well for climbing into the pit. I put on rubber waders, similar to ones fly fishermen use, hoping it would keep me dry from my feet to my chest. I lowered myself down the rope, armed only with an aluminum pole, a camera, and a flashlight. I reached the water level and slowly submerged. I was relieved when I hit bottom. The water was about 1 meter deep, but that was no guarantee that it wouldn't get deeper into another part of what was looking more like an artificial cavern. I had plenty of extra rope, so I tied it around my waist and slowly walked forward, probing the ground ahead of me with the aluminum rod. I shined the light ahead and was quite surprised to see symbols of some sort, done in white paint. I continued my walk down the dark passage and noticed piles of what seemed like bones of small animals and birds along the rocks of the eastern wall. Some of the animals' remains seemed to be very recent, while others were much older, most as if they had been there for a long time. The bones' presence indicated to me that some carnivorous creature lived down there at one time. I continued my journey down the dark corridor, still carefully probing the ground ahead of me, when suddenly the rod sank down without hitting bottom. Apparently, a large shaft was ahead, and I had no idea how wide or deep this drop was, and didn't want to find out. I slowly turned around and made my way back to the opening, about 75 feet away. While walking, I heard a sound behind me as if something large was splashing in the water, heading right for me. I shined the light into the dark tunnel, but couldn't see anything. I flashed back to the hundreds of science fiction movies I had seen in my younger days and thought, well, this is how the movies always begin. Some idiot explores a dangerous area he shouldn't be in, waking up some hungry prehistoric monster only to become its lunch. The sound seemed to be getting louder as it echoed off the walls, but luckily I reached the opening and climbed out quickly. Once back on terra firma, my companion and I projected our lights into the hole, but we didn't see or hear anything. Was it just my imagination, or was there some kind of living creature down there, watching or waiting for me to stumble? In 2006, the New York Park Ranger filled up the pit with dirt and concrete. The state was afraid someone would fall in and get injured or even killed. Since the pit has been sealed, the strange little Joker man or whatever it was has never been seen again. Is this little man of the pit actually the North American leprechaun? My theory is that gnomes, leprechauns, fairies, and other small beings are jinn children having a little fun with us unsuspecting humans. The jinn play an important part in the contact phenomena and paranormal activity manifestations. At present, I'm preparing a new book that unveils the strange race of human beings who have remained hidden from humankind for thousands of years. Encounters of the fourth kind are increasing worldwide. When looking at the reports made to the many UFO research organizations, including the Intruders Foundation, the UFO Reporting Center, the Center for UFO Studies, and the Mutual UFO Network, it seems obvious. The problem is that some of these alien abduction claims aren't investigated by the larger organizations because many reports sound too incredible to believe. At least one of the organizations mentioned above released a statement that they would not investigate wild or bizarre claims in the interest of keeping the study of UFOs respectable and scientific. When I read about their new policy, I thought, come on guys, really? There's little science in what we do already. You're looking for spaceships and aliens on Earth, and you want respect from the scientific community? It's not going to happen in this day and age. It is my firm belief that all contact claims, no matter how strange or outlandish, should be investigated. We must remember that in most cases, a witness's interpretation of the events may make the experience sound too incredible to believe. It is the task of the investigator to weed out facts from the interpreter's fictions or fears. This case study takes us back to 1992 and involves a young couple I'll refer to as Maria and George, who live in Newburgh, New York. Maria and George both have previous histories with the paranormal before they met each other, but after they married, things escalated. As a child, Maria remembers seeing ghosts around her father. The ghosts sometimes would visit her at night and take her away, returning her to her room after several hours had passed. As a teen, after one visit from the ghosts, Maria suddenly developed an irritating eye twitch. Her mother took her to the doctor, who discovered a piece of silicone embedded in her lower eyelid. The doctor was very puzzled as to how it could have gotten there, and as far as I know, there was no type of analysis done on the chip. The doctor just threw it away. As for George, he had reoccurring dreams of strange places and structures at a very early age that were so vivid he would wake up in the morning and promptly draw what he had seen. George has always had a fascination with pyramids because he often saw them in his dreams. He remembers the dream pyramids being so real and detailed that he felt compelled to try to build one. It was as if a telepathic message was placed in his mind, and he was compelled to construct what he saw. Shortly after his dream, George had a friend approach him who also had a fascination with pyramids. Although George didn't tell this person about his dreams, the friend insisted that he work with him to construct a large pyramid made out of glass and metal. Although the pyramid was never constructed, he still wanted to build one, so he started constructing a number of miniature models. While growing up, George had 2 UFO sightings in which he saw strange lights in the sky perform amazing flights of acrobatics. He felt the sightings were staged for him and that some type of telepathic communication was formed between him and the UFOs. After he met Maria, he tried to forget about the UFOs and of the other strange occurrences that he had experienced all his life. However, it wasn't until they married that both their lives would take a very bizarre turn. George feels he has been chosen by an alien intelligence to perform some function in the future. He was told in a dream that these aliens will come for him and take him away when the stars fall out of the sky. Since their marriage, the couple claims that a number of small gray beings with very large eyes have come into their home and abducted them on numerous occasions. After the visits, Maria and George would wake up in the morning feeling very tired, but they've never found any marks on their bodies. The visitations take place with such great frequency that George feels he can predict when they are going to have a visit from the alien creatures. His body will start to tingle. Maria, too, has grown used to seeing the beings and will say to George, "Your friends are here." She calls them friends because George actually feels the beings mean no harm and have come to help them. George and Maria have a daughter who is almost 2 years old. One day, she brought out her doll and asked her mother to open its head. Maria asked her where she got an idea like that, and she told her, "They do it to Daddy at night." The child has also pointed to pictures of alien beings on books and magazine covers and has indicated knowing that they've entered their house. Like most people who've experienced some type of paranormal phenomena, there are several electromagnetic disturbances in their home. Clocks don't work properly, light bulbs explode, and appliances malfunction for no apparent reason. Stranger still, the phone rings several times during the day and night with no one on the line, though sometimes a strange beeping sound is heard. Although they have caller ID, the mysterious caller's number never displays. George recounts a time when he was still living with his parents and a friend was staying with him. As this friend left the house that evening, he saw blue globes of light enter the window to George's room. The friend also says that on more than one occasion he has seen these blue lights enter George's sleeping body. After Maria and George married, the lights didn't go away. They both saw them at least once a week, flying around their apartment, passing right through the windows and walls. George and Maria have been abducted a number of times, the scenario of which is always the same. The beings enter their bedroom and approach them. The next thing George and Maria know, it's morning. After reviewing the case and the hours of audio tape, I have come to the conclusion that the alien intelligence seems to be more interested in Maria than George. Maria generally has more of a recollection of seeing the beings than George. And while George seems to welcome the visitations, Maria is fearful of the beings. The intelligence could be using George to keep Maria calm so the abductions can happen smoothly. But the big question is, why are they interested in Maria? I could speculate on this, but we'll leave the final conclusion up to the reader. My last session with George and Maria was in the late 90s. A well-known UFO investigator was with me at the time. In the interview, I asked Maria specific details about her abduction experience, and what she said next shocked both of us. When I asked Maria if she saw any other human beings on board the craft when she was there, she kept staring at the person who was with me. Eventually, she said, "I wasn't going to mention it, but I saw you on the ship a number of times, strapped to a table." My co-investigator's face paled as she shakily replied, "I've always had dreams of what you're describing to Phil, but I thought they were nothing more than that. Yes, I had dreams of being on board an alien craft as a child and adult. The dreams made me interested in finding out more." Needless to say, this was an unexpected turn in the investigation. Unfortunately, my co-investigator, who had become quite well known as a paranormal researcher in the 80s and 90s, suddenly stopped pursuing her interests in UFOs sometime later. I've since lost all contact with her. Located about 60 miles from New York City, Newburgh marks the center of the Hudson River Valley. From June to December, a dark triangle-shaped UFO was seen moving silently over the back country and heavily populated city area. The number of people who saw this object was in the hundreds, perhaps the thousands. This number is based on reports made to police, newspapers, radio stations, and UFO researchers, including myself. As in other encounters/sightings, the object had bright multicolored lights around its edges and 3 to 6 lights underneath. It was reported to have been at least 200 feet from end to end and appeared very thin. At times, the light would hover above a house or a car and project down a brilliant beam of white light. Some witnesses felt a type of psychic communication with the object. Later, many of these people would report having contact or abduction experiences with alien intelligences. On May 23rd, area residents observed a large, dark triangle in the sky. The object was seen over I-91 over Hartford and caused a traffic jam as motorists slowed down to get a better look at it. The Hartford Courant reported the object was responsible for at least 3 fender benders, as startled drivers slammed on the brakes while the UFO passed over their car at an altitude of no more than 500 feet. The object was also seen at Bradley International Airport by air traffic controllers who reported plain naked-eye sightings of the object, but no matching radar activity. The next day, Connecticut State Police said the sighting was caused by a number of prankster stunt pilots who had tried to fake a UFO in New York 8 years earlier. However, people who saw the UFO said it was unlike any known craft they had ever seen before. The object looked like it was from another world. After this sighting, I spoke with 9 people who witnessed the object while on I-91. All were normal, professional people who described the encounter as frightening and amazing. The following report was sent to me in 1994, and although the witness didn't give his name or the sighting's location, I still believe it should be included here. It was a dark, windy November night years ago, but the vision still haunts me. I was 16 back then, and was in the forest with a friend, having some fun. At our usual fire spot, we saw a couple of lights through the trees. I thought they were from a road nearby, but I wasn't sure. My friend fired 6 starter gun blanks into the air, and suddenly the lights started to ascend over the trees. Now panicking, we saw that the lights were from a big black triangular object. It hovered just over the trees and flew over us very slowly and very silently. The wind stopped, making it seem like this thing created silence. We panicked and started to run like crazy. When we finally found a clear spot, we were spotted by some kind of searchlight. It was the object. We had just run a 45-minute walk in less than 10 minutes. We were convinced the aliens were going to abduct us. Then everything went black, and we were back at the camp. The fire was out and 3 hours of time had passed. The next day, a couple of Army helicopters flew very low over the area where me and my friend's encounter happened. Writing, to the author, is the first time I filed a report on the encounter. No one believed us at the time, and we were afraid to go to the government with our story. On March 26th, just before 8:30 p.m., police in Thomaston and surrounding towns received calls about an aircraft at low altitude, possibly in trouble. As the lights approached, residents realized what was approaching was no ordinary type of aircraft they had ever seen. Witnesses that contacted me directly or made calls to the local police described the object as a dark triangle, perhaps 200 feet in length from the apex to the rear. The triangular craft had 6 lights on the bottom, 1 in the front, amber in color, 3 across the middle which were blue, yellow, and green, and 2 at each point in the rear, both red. The object moved silently over the streets and homes at less than 800 feet in altitude and, according to the newspaper accounts published the next day, created a near panic. Witnesses who stood directly under the UFO said it was so huge and low that it took a long time to pass over. Looking up, they noticed the dark mass black out the clear night sky. The object occasionally projected down a brilliant beam of white light that engulfed entire houses and cars. One witness told me that when the light covered his car, he had to pull over because it caused a complete whiteout. This witness, in addition to others who were bathed in the light, claimed they felt some type of contact with the object. Some had images appear in their mind of alien-like creatures, while others claimed to have heard a voice speak in an unknown language. The UFO silently floated away but was not reported north of Hartford. Where did it go? It seemed to have disappeared without a trace, yet there are no witnesses who saw it vanish in the sky. I first became interested in Ninum Mountain in my early days of investigating the UFO sightings at the Hudson River Valley, sometime in winter of 1984. My investigation team was looking for a high vantage point to set up cameras and radio equipment. We wanted to try and document some of the sightings that had been taking place. A resident of Carmel, a nearby town, contacted me to tell us about the Ranger Tower on top of the mountain and how it would be a great spot to set up an observation post. I could keep surveillance on several counties at once. The first time I visited Ninum was in July of 1985. I was able to drive my car about halfway up the mountain road, but then had to park and walk. The rest of the journey was a winding dirt trail that cut into the heavily forested area. On my walk up to the top, I noticed a stone wall off to the right that ended in a small clearing. At first, it appeared to be a mound of stones overgrown with thick vines and shrubs. I took a closer look and realized it was a stone chamber, hidden by ages of overgrowth. I cleared away the vines and confirmed that it was indeed one of these structures whose builders remain a mystery. This was the 6th time I had come across one of these chambers in a location known to have a great deal of paranormal activity, UFO sightings in particular. But I digress. My main objective that day was to get to the top of the mountain, climb the tower, and tried to document anything unusual that night in the sky. It was getting dark, so the mysterious chamber would have to wait for another day. I reached the top of the mountain at sunset and began to climb the tall tower. The view was fantastic. At about midnight, the wind picked up and the tower actually swayed back and forth. Although it was July, the wind chill at the top made the air feel quite cold. While I didn't observe anything strange in the sky that night, something was definitely happening on the ground, unbeknownst to me. At 2 a.m., I climbed down the tower stairs and made my way down the dark mountain path to the parking lot. I had a strange and uneasy feeling, like something or someone in the woods was watching me. As I continued my walk down the trail, I suddenly heard an audible buzzing sound, followed by a crack. This sound repeated over and over again in 15-second intervals. The crack sounded as if someone was walking in the woods, stepping on twigs and snapping them. I stopped at the same chamber I had visited earlier and saw what appeared to be flashes of light. They stayed close to the ground and on the right side of the trail, perhaps 200 yards into the woods. Then, the same thing appeared on the left side of the trail at about the same distance. The activity looked like the light of a camera flash, but the strange thing was that the flashes on the right were bluish white, while the flashes on the left were yellow. The lights were about as bright as lightning flashes and looked like some type of electrical or plasma discharge. I walked into the woods to my right to see if there is a source of this phenomena that could be discovered, but I couldn't ever seem to get close enough to the flashes. The closer I got, the further away they seemed to move. I thought to myself that perhaps the light source was actually a great deal further than I had originally estimated. If that was indeed the case, the amount of energy needed to produce the burst I was seeing had to be considerable. The flashes didn't seem to be radiating from one particular point, but appeared to be coming from all directions. Every time the lights flashed, the trees would light up and the trail, which was once dark, became illuminated. I decided to return to the main trail when suddenly I began to feel very lightheaded and dizzy. I stopped, sat on a rock for a moment, and noticed the flashes of light slowly fade and vanish. Once the flashes disappeared, I felt better and was able to walk to my car. I went home feeling mystified about what had happened that night, but guessed it was some type of electromagnetic phenomena. What I witnessed intrigued me so much, I began conducting research on the mountain's history and geology. Ninum Mountain has an intriguing history of UFO sightings. Strange lights that circle the mountain have been seen on many occasions, and some witnesses have even reported large clusters of brilliant, colorful globes settling down on its summit. A restaurant owner in the area reported that she frequently saw lights of various colors circle the mountain. The description of these lights is almost identical to what the native shamans experienced 80 years or so ago. The Native Americans called them the spirits of the mountain, but local residents today call them UFOs. Perhaps the most interesting close encounter of the spirit lights of Ninum was that of a 48-year-old man who often visited the mountain for hunting and camping. Following is his story as told to me in 1992. The man is a former government agency intelligence officer we'll refer to as Thatcher. I was up at Ninum Mountain in January of 1990, doing a little hunting and walking through the woods. I reached the top of the mountain and the wind was gusting really hard. I bet the wind chill factor was at least 20 below zero. I was on the north side of the forest when it started to snow. I was already very cold, and with the sun gone, the temperature began to drop even more. The wind also started to gust, and I could feel my hands, feet, and face starting to develop frostbite. It then began snowing so hard I couldn't even see 10 feet in front of me. I quickly became disoriented and could barely move. I knew I was pretty high up. There was nothing around to really shelter me from the wind, as most of the trees were bare. The sky was very dark, and there was a fog all around me. The fog was so thick that it was difficult to see, and I started to lose my bearings. I felt dizzy, fell to the ground, and couldn't move. It was as if my joints were frozen solid. I thought to myself that this was it. Someone would find my frozen body weeks from now. I stopped feeling pain and knew it was a bad sign. I looked up to the sky and my face became covered with snow. Just then, right overhead, 10 or so lights of different colors appeared out of nowhere and started to descend from the clouds in the shape of a circle. I heard no sound, and it was a very strange thing to see because the lights looked very fuzzy through the mist and fog. Then I blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up in the ranger station. The ranger told me he found me at the parking area at the bottom of the mountain, lying on the hood of my car. He knew I was there because he received a telephone call alerting them to my dire situation. I have no idea how I got to safety. There was no way I could have walked all that distance on my own. Those lights must have been some sort of ship or maybe a UFO. They must have been friendly because they saved me from a frozen death. It seems that from the point I blacked out until the time I woke up on the ranger station was about 40 minutes, so it's not like I was missing for days. Whoever my rescuers were, they didn't keep me in their ship for very long. The only thing I remember is being in a room and seeing canisters with figures which look like people in them. I know this sounds a little crazy, but I remember seeing a canister that was empty, and I really felt that whoever they were, they're going to come back for me, because that's the canister that I'm supposed to be in. Thatcher had an interesting UFO experience of some type, and was transported out of danger by an unknown intelligence. This intelligence may also have called the Ranger, alerting him to Thatcher's condition. What are the lights of the Ninum Mountain? Are they aliens, dimensional entities, or the spirits that guard and protect the mountain? After his experience at Ninum, Thatcher would continue to have sightings of UFOs and would hear voices in his head telling him, "You can come with us if you want, but it has to be your choice." In 2006, I lost touch with Thatcher. His only family member is a sister who said he left a note one day saying not to worry because he was moving away, after which he vanished off the face of the earth. I asked some of his friends about him, and they believe he may have moved to another country to hide because he often said that government agents were after him and wanted to place him in a prison to interrogate him about his alien contacts. Whatever the reason for his vanishing act, it's clear it all began with a contact experience at Ninum Mountain. The 1983 and 1984 sightings of a UFO in the Hudson River Valley of New York were receiving a great deal of attention from local media. WNBC, a radio station in the greater New York area, asked me to come in to talk about the sightings. During the broadcast, I gave out my phone number and, shortly after the show ended, was barraged by calls. After about 24 calls, I received one I found very intriguing. The caller identified himself as a 35-year-old New York State Power Attorney police officer who worked as a security guard at the Indian Point Nuclear Reactor Complex, located on the Hudson River in Buchanan, just south of the town of Peekskill. The officer had been driving home from work when he caught the end of the talk show and was anxious to talk with me. He told me that he was one of 12 officers who had seen the Hudson Valley UFO while on duty at the reactor complex. I had already received numerous sightings from people living near the plant who told me they had seen the UFO over the reactor, but I had very few details at the time. The person on the phone worked at the reactor complex. His responsibility was confirming these reports in addition to his other security-related duties. Although it has been 25 years, I still won't use his real name and reveal his identity. Nevertheless, the sighting at Indian Point remains the most incredible part of the Hudson Valley saga. On the night of July 24th, 1984, a giant triangular UFO hovered directly over one of the reactors at Indian Point for more than 10 minutes. This was exciting because on July 24th, a Brewster resident had videotaped the UFO from his backyard 15 minutes before it appeared over the nuclear plant. I also had 14 reports from various Peekskill residents who had seen the UFO hovering over the reactor that night. This was excellent validation. A number of different sources could confirm the sighting over the reactor. The security officer who called me was always referred to as Carl in my previous discussions concerning the Indian Point encounter. Carl informed me that he was going out on a limb and jeopardizing his career by coming forward with information about the sighting. He was convinced that what he and his fellow officers saw over the plant was something unconventional. They all felt fortunate, however, because they were able to get a real good look at the object as it hovered less than 300 feet above the exhaust tower at reactor number 3. The event was so shocking, Carl said, that the shift commander was ready to give the order to shoot the UFO down. When I asked Carl to meet me in person, he said he'd have to obtain clearance from his supervisor. The next day, he phoned and said his supervisor had cleared me to come to the reactor site on September 5th to speak with him and several other officers who had seen the object. He said no tape recorders or cameras would be allowed for security reasons, and I would have to submit to a routine check upon entering and leaving the security area. To make my very long story short, just before my appointment at Indian Point to interview the security people who had seen the UFO, I received a call from an individual from the New York Power Authority, stating that my request to visit the plant had been overturned and was now denied. The only reason this person gave me was that I might compromise the security of a sensitive area. I contacted Carl at his home to let him know, and he didn't seem surprised. We arranged to meet at an out-of-the-way place outside the jurisdiction of plant operations at the NYPA. Carl told me that he would try to arrange for a number of other officers to join us, but couldn't promise anything. The first interview took place at a place called the Bypass Diner at Peekskill late on September 12, 1984, after the guards were off duty. 6 of them showed up, and with assistance from investigators on my team, we were able to obtain detailed interviews from all of them. Carl talked to me for 45 minutes that night, and would again on October 5th for a similar length of time. The first interview was taped, but not the second. Carl said there was certain information pertaining to plant security he did not want recorded. Carl had worked as a security officer for the Power Authority for 3 years and had been a New York State police officer before that. It turned out he'd had 2 sightings at the reactor complex, the first on June 14th and the other on July 24th. His account, in his own words, is presented as follows. On June 14th, I was on outside patrol at Indian Point number 3. It was approximately 10:15 at night, when I noticed out in the distance a series of lights low in the sky. We have a clear view for several miles in all directions, and I noticed these lights moving toward the direction of the facility. They were white with a yellow hue. I watched them for about 10 minutes and estimated they were about 1/4 of a mile from my position. They were approaching from the northeast, going southwest, coming directly toward the plant. At that point, I looked over at the adjoining Consolidated Edison nuclear power complex, and there were about 10 of these security people looking at the same object. I got on the radio and called some of the other units to come out to my location to observe the object with me. I knew that it was something strange, and since it was getting so close, I wanted someone to come and assist me if I needed help. I didn't want to take any chances. 2 other guards responded to his call. We all looked at the same thing for approximately 20 minutes, and during that time I would say it hovered in one area for about 15 minutes without moving. The lights were incredibly bright and steady. It was hovering over the parking lot on the reactor grounds above some buildings that had lights on 24 hours a day. These are bright security lights, but the lights on the object were at least 10 times as bright. The building it was over is quite large, about 80 feet high, and this object dwarfed it. I estimated its size to be at least 300 feet from end to end, and it seemed to have a cone or triangle shape. As I watched, a plane passed over, and when it passed above the object, the UFO blocked out the lights of the plane, and a few seconds later, the plane emerged from behind the other side of the object. So there was some type of huge dark mass behind the lights. Then about 15 minutes later, the object started to move, and when it did, it went very slow, no more than 10 miles an hour. No small planes could have stayed in formation with the gusting winds that night. The wind didn't phase these lights at all. When it hovered, it just stayed there, rock solid. I was in the service and flew helicopters, and I know how hard it is to keep a formation with any type of aircraft in a high wind. No way was this a formation of planes. I saw no hint of any standard lights that a plane would have. Also, the lights were much too intense for a small aircraft. When the object turned, it rotated as if it was lying on a wheel. It made a very slow, sharp 90-degree turn. The object always moved in the direction of the apex. Then about 10 minutes later, it moved toward the Hudson and went north. It seems the UFO didn't approach the high security area of the reactor that night. But that was to change when Carl told me about the incredible sighting that took place on the night of July 24th, 1984 at 8:40 p.m. His sighting account continues below. Another security guard called on his radio saying, "Hey, here comes that UFO again." With that being heard all over the air, everyone came running to see it. At that time, there were 5 of us, including 2 supervisors who also came out to see it. It approached from basically the same direction as before, but this time the lights were changing color. First, they would all be yellow, then white, and then they all turned blue. The lights were in a semicircle, and in the rear, pretty far back, was this red, blinking light. As the object approached the plant, it got as close as 500 feet from us. It looked like an ice cream cone. You could see it was a solid body about the size of 3 football fields. At this time, it was directly over our heads, and we were looking up at it. It was still moving, but very slowly. I could walk and keep up with it, so it must have been going slower than 5 to 10 miles an hour. It took a long time to pass over, maybe 5 minutes. All this time, you could see the structure behind it. Only one of the 3 reactors was in operation, ours. This object picked the right one to fly over, and that's what got our supervisor worried. This thing got very close to the exhaust tower of reactor number 3. No known aircraft can travel that slow, since the wind was also gusting that night. We were all standing there with our mouths open and in complete awe of it. If this thing stayed over us, the order was already given to get ready to shoot it down. We had shotguns that were waiting for the final word to fire on it. Another officer, who was on duty inside the security building, was watching the TV monitors at a console that allowed him to aim strategically placed cameras around and outside the buildings. During his interview, he told me, "I received a call from 2 officers saying there was something in the sky, and I asked them what it was. They told me to swing my camera over in the direction where they were looking at this object. One of these cameras is at the top of a 95-foot tall pole. I turned this camera in that direction and saw 8 bright lights in a V shape, very wide, almost like a half circle. They were at least as bright as the landing lights on a large jet. My supervisor and I panned the camera up and down, and the object was very large, bigger than a football field. The object was so huge I had to pan the camera nearly 180 degrees to scan the entire object from front to back. It was one solid structure and very large. We had it on camera for about 15 minutes. I was trying to think of some logical explanation of what it was, but could not. Whatever it was larger than a C-5A, the largest aircraft in the world, with a wingspan of 212 feet. This was much larger. It seemed very brazen. It acted like it didn't care who saw it. Yet another officer, who was very reluctant to be taped for fear of jeopardizing his job, said, "There was this series of lights in the shape of a boomerang, and behind it was this dark structure, and there were these 2 things on the bottom that looked like hollow spheres of some sort. They looked like portals that could open up and rockets or something could fly out. The object was made up of some type of very dark material that only reflected a small part of the high-intensity security lights. It was very low and so close I actually got scared looking at it. I then pulled out my handgun, a 9mm pistol, and was getting ready to fire at it, but something popped into my head that this was a bad idea, so I put the gun back in my holster." I would later meet one last time with Carl, whereupon I was informed that he could no longer discuss the sightings since his superiors knew about our meetings and was advised to stop. It seemed very strange to me that officials at a nuclear complex knew every detail about my secret meeting with Carl and his fellow officers. There is really no way they could have known unless we were under some type of surveillance. In December 1984, I tried to get the management of the reactor plant to discuss the UFO incident, but they wouldn't cooperate. Gary Cullington, the then news director for radio station WVIP in Mount Casco, New York, did get an acknowledgement from a Carl Patrick of the plant's information office that the sightings did indeed take place. Cullington said, "Patrick told me there were definitely sightings, and the New York State Police did an investigation and arrested 4 Cessna pilots. However, police records confirmed that no pilots were arrested on the night in question or on the days that followed." Cullington said he asked for a copy of the UFO incident report, but was told that all security procedures and measures that are taken here are completely confidential and to protect our own security. Cullington then asked Patrick, "Can you tell me if they fired on this thing?" Patrick replied, "I can neither confirm nor deny that the guards fired upon it, but they did what was necessary to protect the plant." Shortly after the Cullington interview with Indian Point spokesperson Carl Patrick, the Journal News local Westchester paper published a story called "Did Aliens Buzz Indian Point?" The story confirmed the information given to newsman Gary Cullington. A spokesperson for Indian Point also confirmed the sightings. I then filed 5 Freedom of Information Act requests with New York Power Authority and the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission for any records relating to the UFO incident. All replied that they had no documents. My investigation of the Indian Point sightings took place before the publication of Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO Sightings, co-authored by Bob Pratt and the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek. However, information about the sightings at the plant continued to come my way years after the book's publishing, thanks to 2 contacts who held their positions as secretaries inside the plant's security area. One of these contacts told me that on numerous occasions the night shift workers saw short, gray-skinned, alien-looking beings with large black eyes and tight-fitting black uniforms enter the reactor core area by walking through the walls. The aliens always appeared in pairs at 3 in the morning. At least 4 sightings of these beings occurred over a 6-month period. The beings appear to have a shimmer around them as if encased by a force field, and one of them carried an instrument it moved over the casing of the reactor core. Soon after the UFO sightings, engineers at the plant discovered a crack in the reactor casing and an unexplainable power drain. Somehow, this story leaked out to the press and was the subject of a number of local newspapers and television stories. The power drain was a major concern because Indian Point No. 3 supplies electricity to the NYC subway system and a number of secret NASA listening posts in the area. According to both of my contacts, a man dressed in civilian clothes identifying himself as Colonel Roberts came to the plant one afternoon and had a lengthy discussion with the plant administrator. Although my contact could not hear the conversation from her boss's office, whose door was left partially open, she was shocked when Colonel Roberts seemed to lose his temper, yelling, The contact experience takes place on many levels, including ones that happen but are not immediately recognized as such. A person can lead a normal existence, complete with all the good things life has to offer, and then one day, without warning, he or she has contact with a non-human intelligence and is thrust into a new reality. I believe all close encounters are a form of contact, and at times they may be so subtle that the individual may not recognize those strange events as such until years later. I received the following letter from a physician who had multiple experiences in the past with ghost-like voices that could be considered a kind of dimensional contact. Although she has no conscious recollection of being abducted or meeting alien beings, she did see a UFO on November 15, 2008, in Nevada. I thought it was important to include the woman's letter because it serves as a good example of a credible person who has been taken out of our mundane reality and plunged into a world of the paranormal. It was about 5 in the morning and I was driving my car, driving just outside Las Vegas with the sunroof open to get some desert air. Suddenly I felt the car vibrate in an odd way. It was a bone-jarring vibration that was strangely noiseless. I looked around to see if something was wrong with my car, but nothing was out of the ordinary. Finally, I looked up at the dark sky and saw the star field disappear above me for a very wide distance in front and behind the road I was on. I took my foot off the gas and pulled into the slow lane. There in the sky was a triangular blackness that was huge. It was traveling very slowly, keeping perpendicular to the highway. I was pretty excited and started waving and honking at passing truckers, pointing up to the sky. Thinking back now, it was probably too dark and the other drivers must have thought I was nuts. The craft couldn't have been going more than 40 miles per hour. It moved very slowly over my car and toward the mountains. There were no lights or markings on it anywhere, and it was completely noiseless. The only reason I had seen it was because it blocked out the stars. I could see the lights from the strip even at this early morning hour, and as the object moved in that direction, it muddily reflected the strip's brilliant lights on its bottom until it had passed over. As it continued north, it vanished over the mountains. I know there's a military base in the direction I saw it leave. My engine wasn't affected and I didn't experience any missing time, but since my sighting, I've been hearing a strange voice. I don't know what it's saying or where it's from. It's all been in my head and could possibly be explained if an alien intelligence is communicating with me from another dimension. What I like about the above report is that it once again shows that whoever or whatever is operating the triangular UFOs is very bold and couldn't care less how many people see it. The physician's account is also a good example of a close encounter and a very subtle form of contact. In some cases, contact is made in an unconscious or semi-conscious state, as if to gently condition or prepare the person. As time goes on, the individual may develop psychic abilities, the majority of which develop exceptional skills as painters or illustrators. The gifted individual might paint images they've seen in their dreams showing unearthly landscapes and non-human entities. In most of these so-called dreams, the person is slowly given information over an extended period of time and shown pictures, symbols, and sometimes even video projections of events that will transpire in Earth's future. Before you discount a contact encounter that takes place in the dream state, please remember that there are many cultures and religions who firmly believe that the divine, angels, and other beings communicate with selected individuals while they sleep. The examples in history are much too numerous to cover in this chapter, but one can use the resources in this book's bibliography to obtain more information on the subject. The next case involves a middle-aged woman who had encounters with alien-like creatures as a child, and then vivid dreams as an adult about these same aliens and their purpose. I consider what she's experienced more than just dreams. They are a telepathic form of contact. Although I do not have room in this book to include all the dreams of contact she's had, the most important were selected. This individual would like to be known simply as Silver. The first experience took place when Silver was 5 years old, living in Florida. She woke up one night confused, looked out the window, and saw 4 or 5 odd-looking dog-like creatures walking across the yard heading toward the forest area near her house. As Silver watched, the creatures stopped, turned in unison, and stared at her. This really spooked her, so she let go of the curtains and ran away from the window. She doesn't remember the time, but knew it was late because everybody else in the house was asleep. When Silver turned around to flee, she saw someone standing in the middle of the room. This person was about 5 feet tall, slender, and wearing a cape with a tall, vampire-like collar that hid part of her face. Not seeing the mouth move, possibly using mental telepathy, the person told Silver, "You are not supposed to be up. You have to go to bed." Normally not a rude child, and for some reason rather bold, Silver replied, "You're not my mama, and you can't tell me what to do." After that sighting, she continued to have sightings of unusual lights and strange dreams, most of which she can remember clearly. Silver had many more experiences, one of which took place in 1994. She woke up and saw 2 gray beings alongside her while laying in bed. Each being took one of her arms and floated her through the closed window of her bedroom. As they passed through the glass, she described the feeling of her molecular self moving like passing through jello. Once outside the house, she and the beings were taken upward by a light into a small craft. Silver was then led into a room where she saw gadgets and all types of technical control panels, some being manned by greys or other beings. In this room, she saw people who acted like zombies. They were sitting behind a long table with dividers between them. It looked like some of the beings were a cross between the greys and humans, but they were cooperating with them. Silver recognized one of the people as her uncle. She felt the gray beings wanted her to see everything happening. She remembers seeing one person who looked more human than gray sitting by a table doing something. She can't remember exactly what. Silver also remembers seeing a number of other different types of beings. One type she calls the troll people she didn't like because they came out of her closet at night. Silver thought they looked scary. They wore hoods over their heads and were short and stocky. After the ship visitation, Silver woke up in her bed, wondering if what she had seen was a dream or a real experience. As for the troll people, Silver is more willing to talk about them as an adult. One particular encounter is still fresh in her mind as she relates it below. I was 11 years old and it was 1963. I was terrified to be in my bedroom at night with the lights out. I always covered my head with a blanket and would lie very still. On this night, after I was able to feel more relaxed, I slowly removed the lightweight cover from my eyes and looked into the closet. There, I saw an ugly face staring at me from the darkness. I didn't want to find out what it was, so I whipped the covers back over my head. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, almost choking me and making the whole bed seem to shake. Somehow I fell asleep and had an awful dream where I saw what looked like very short, blunt-faced troll creatures. Its wrinkled, wide-eyed face poked out from a hood the same brown color as its outer coverings. The creature may have been 3 feet tall, I'm not sure. All I know is that it was short, bulky, and ugly. I knew it was there to take me away. It walked up to me, seized my ankles with a strong grip, and pulled me toward the closet. In the closet was a shiny gray light in the middle of which was a hole. The troll was trying to pull me toward the hole. I clawed and grabbed for anything I could, trying to keep this thing from taking me away. I don't know how the whole thing ended. The next thing I knew, I was in bed and it was a bright, sunny day. It's interesting to note that in many of these cases I investigated, the entities come from a hole in a dark or dimly lit closet to enter the room. In at least one case in my files, The person saw a green or bluish light in their closet and walked over to investigate. When the man, then 25 years old, entered the large walk-in closet, a black hole materialized in the center and two glowing yellow hands came and grabbed his arms. The hands then tried to pull this person into the hole, but he was able to break free. In one mighty burst of energy, the man fell backwards, breaking the phantom hand's hold. The hole closed up, and the closet was once again dark. Do beings that live in a parallel dimension periodically open portals to take people? Or are these types of occurrences nothing more than dreams? Silver's contact experiences continued through most of her adult life, and she has noticed paranormal activity seems to run in the family. She knows for sure that her children have had nightmare encounters with the Greys on more than one occasion. However, unlike Silver, they are afraid of the beings and don't want anything to do with them. Silver's son, who is now 27 years old, once woke up in the middle of the night and saw a Grey standing by his bed. He was very scared and took a swing at it, but only hit air. The being vanished. Her daughter also reported that on many occasions she would wake up to see a blue light in the room and hear whispering voices. On December 17, 1993, Silver would have the following contact experience. Luckily, she was keeping a journal after each dream, so the information is well documented. I was by a roaring river. Other people were around. A huge spaceship appeared overhead and beamed us aboard. We didn't want to go, but we had no choice. Once aboard, we met people who handed us clothes to put on. They looked human, but we knew they had taken human-like form so we wouldn't be afraid of them. With me on the ship were 2 guys and 3 women. We were all put in the same room together. I was amazed at the expanse of this craft. The aliens had created a realistic Earth-like surface inside. I told the other people with me that the aliens wanted to impregnate the women because they were trying to crossbreed with us to make themselves better. We left the room and found an empty one made of shiny material. In that room we saw a chute but couldn't tell what it was used for. We guessed there was a room at the end of the chute and wondered if it was a means of escape. So we went down the chute to another room that had a window. At first, no one was there, so we carefully walked toward the window. Suddenly, other human-type aliens surrounded us, but they didn't seem to be paying us any attention. These people seemed to be drugged or fixed in some way that made them robotic. We went to the window where we were able to escape. Once we were out of the craft, I wondered if we were really outside or if the aliens just let us think we were. We ran across some rough terrain and suddenly heard a vehicle approaching. We scrambled to the side of the road and hid in some bushes. The vehicle went by, and I knew it was the aliens looking for us. As we made our escape, we finally saw a fence on the other side, a farmhouse and a barn. There were a couple of cars and trucks parked in the yard. A woman in a calf-length dress came right up to the fence. She was friendly, and we knew she wouldn't hand us over to the aliens. She motioned for us to follow her to the house, inside, to a back room with a hallway. Somehow, I was spotted by the aliens, who were crudely disguised as a sheriff, deputy, and a couple of men. I climbed into the attic to hide, but they came after me. I managed to escape. A number of my writings mention the UFO experience as incredibly complex and possibly involving beings from several different origins. One type of these beings may have been the jinn. Another type of beings associated with the contact experiences are what UFO investigators called the Nordics. The Nordics are tall, with very long blonde or red hair, blue or green eyes, and light skin. They seem to be more angelic in nature and have often protected humans against negative entities. In some cases, the Nordics teach the people they contact and give them philosophical or technical information. Below is a contact dream experience from May 31st, 1995, in which Silver and her husband encountered both types of beings. In this contact experience, Silver was with her husband walking on a rural road when suddenly a man appeared about 35 feet away. Silver describes him as about 5'5", with dark hair and a broad, husky build. She got the sense that the man didn't like them and could cause them harm. Suddenly, he changed into a lizard-like creature that stood upright like a man. As the creature started walking toward them, he said something to her husband that immobilized him. Her husband fell to the ground. The shapeshifter continued to walk toward them, but before it could reach them, Silver picked her husband up as he was trying to come out of his daze. Just then, a huge, broad-shouldered giant appeared, a 7 to 8 foot tall man with blonde, shoulder-length hair. The giant wore robe-type garments that appeared to be multicolored, patterned, or layered in some other way. Silver doesn't remember what the giant's face looked like, but she knew the being was there to help them. He came up to them, touched her husband on his back and Silver on her head and arm, and she blacked out. She knew this being had power over the lizard creature and would not let it harm them. Silver wrote later that she felt the being could be among us, and because they are able to alter their shapes, we would never know it. I have met many people who say they have dreamt of being abducted or contacted by aliens in their dreams. Are people actually taken out of their bodies by some unknown intelligence? If this is the case, the body would have to be separate from the spirit or soul somehow. The soul would experience the abduction or contact, and the body and brain would be left behind to continue the dream. When the soul is placed back into the body and mind, body and soul once again merge. The contact experience itself combines the brain's dreams, causing the person to remember mixed or confusing images. As incredible as this theory may sound, we may have to broaden our ideas of how alien intelligences may contact us. I have many case files in which an abduction or contact took place in this so-called astral state. After using the Ouija board in England and having the problem with the evil spirits, the last communication I had with this entity ended with it saying it knew I was going to America, and that it would follow me across the Atlantic. It said I couldn't get away from it and would feel its power. Well, it must have made good on its promise, because really strange things happened to me once I arrived in the United States in 1977. I told some friends about everything that happened in England. They were interested and wanted to see a demonstration, so they talked me into going to an old cemetery in Washington, Connecticut, where I lived with my parents. We were all just teenagers at the time, looking for cheap thrills, but we bought a Ouija board just to see what would happen. We went at night, and as soon as we began using it, the pointer began moving and spinning around. Then we heard something that sounded like 4 or 5 voices screaming nearby. Then it stopped. We used the board again, and the noise came back, but this time it sounded like 60 people, all yelling something we could not understand, and we couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like someone was having a wild party, but the noise was more like growls than people screaming. At times, the noises sounded more animal than human. It was very strange. After a while, the yelling stopped and we left. I guess that in total, we heard those strange sounds for a good 25 minutes. A few years later, in 1985, one morning at about 3 o'clock, I suddenly woke up feeling as if the room was no longer solid, like something was opening up somewhere. I heard a voice coming from the basement say,
"You want something?"
When I heard the voice, I knew a spirit was in the room with me. It was definitely an evil presence and gave me a horrendous feeling. I couldn't see anything, but I definitely heard noises in the walls and windows. My first thought was that some unearthly being was in the room with me. It felt as if something was trying to get into me by digging down my spine. It was horrible. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I left my room, went downstairs to the den, and turned on the television to try and calm myself down, but it didn't work. I sat in the chair and couldn't keep myself from rocking back and forth. I couldn't focus my eyes anywhere for more than a couple of seconds. I felt the thing trying to pull at me and yank my soul out of my body. There were times when I felt taken out of my body and had to force myself back in. It was like a tug of war. Something was trying to pull me out and I was trying to stay in. I knew if I could last until dawn, things would be all right and this would be over, at least for a while. I knocked on my parents' bedroom door and they saw I was upset. My mother agreed to stay up with me. When we discussed that night years later, my mom said she didn't know what was going on, but she strongly felt that if she hadn't gotten up and sat with me that night, I wouldn't be here today. Morning finally came and I was fine. The evil presence had disappeared. The next day I called my friend John, who answered the phone sounding surprised. "Bruce, is that you?" I told him that yes, it was me, and asked him why he sounded so shocked. John said he heard me outside his house screaming at 4 in the morning. When he went outside to investigate, no one was there. He was sure something terrible had happened to me, but he was afraid to call my house. 2 weeks later, my cat formed a habit of coming into the bed with me. It didn't want to curl up or snuggle, it just stood there, staring at me. After a few minutes of watching me, it would screech, its hair would stand on end, and it would run away. Also around this time, my parents told me I was screaming in my sleep. They said I would yell, "No, no, no, no," like I was being attacked. This continued for a while, but I don't really remember anything happening except for a dream I had in which I was walking across a bridge. A being was walking from the other side, approaching me. We met in the middle and looked at each other. When we made eye contact, I suddenly went flying backwards, as if being repelled by a powerful magnetic force. When I was thrown backwards, I landed in my bed and woke up. Life started to return to normal, but it wasn't long before I had what I call interdimensional experiences while hiking through Steep Rock State Park in Washington, Connecticut. I first heard about strange things going on there from a guy named Ned. He told me that years ago he had a strange vision while hiking at Steep Rock. He had sat down to take a rest, and once he was relaxed, had a vision of a spirit of a man he believed was a Native American chief. The chief's spirit approached him and said Ned had to do something to raise awareness about the race of people that used to live there. Well, much later, a dig was done at Steep Rock, and archaeologists discovered that the place where Ned had his vision of the chief was the home of a Native American shaman. The area of Steep Rock called Hidden Valley was another place I had more strange experiences. I was there in June of 2008 hiking with my friend Rachel, and I unwittingly took a photograph of something glowing that looked like a fairy. Though I didn't see anything in person, the glowing light only appeared on film. We crossed the river, which was only ankle deep, and I saw something I had never seen before, something I can only describe as a solar waterfall. The phenomenon was very wide, like a waterfall or pillar of sunlight falling from the sky. I think my experiences at Steep Rock are related to the author's work published in Interdimensional Universe. After some traveling, in 1991, I visited American Indian Institute near Steep Rock and purchased a picture of a Native American chief, a very nice picture of a brave, noble-looking person. I hung the picture on my door and left the house. When I came back home, I found a feather on the floor right under the chief's picture. I picked up the feather and thought it was odd, but didn't dwell on it or read into it too much. When I came home the next day, another feather, a different one, was at the same spot, below the picture. The day after, I wasn't in my room but still in the house, and when I went back up to my room, I found yet another feather. What's weird is that this time I was home. I didn't hear or see anything or anyone enter. I have no idea how the feather got there. It was after this third occurrence that I realized the feathers must have materialized when I wasn't there. I wondered if they were some type of symbol or message, so I said out loud, "I don't understand what you mean." When I got home the next day, I found 3 feathers under the picture. 6 months later, I went up to the attic for something, and when I came back down, 3 feathers once again found their way below the chief's picture. Something must have been triggered because after I asked the picture and found the feathers, I began to remember unbelievable experiences I had at Steep Rock. I thought at first the memories were dreams, but they were incredibly detailed. I was starting to remember a great many otherworldly things that had happened to me that were previously blocked out of my mind. Now a memory was coming back. I had encounters and contact with beings in the Hidden Valley area of Steep Rock. I remember meeting a being there who told me an ancient race once lived there. The encounter was in the spring of 1990 when I was hiking with a friend in Steep Rock. After a long journey, we were surprised to meet a very old woman all by herself except for the goat that was with her. They were standing by the river. I should mention that although the woman looked elderly, there seemed to be an air of power about her. She saw my friend and me, and we went over to her to introduce ourselves. Somehow, she ended up asking me for a favor. I don't remember what it was, but apparently I agreed to help her, and she seemed appreciative. She asked us jokingly, "How old do you think I am?" My friend and I examined her. She was dressed in raggedy clothes, and I didn't think she was wearing any shoes, but despite that, she had an incredible presence. As if reading our thoughts, the woman said, "I am a great deal stronger than you think." We didn't answer her and left feeling a little strange. My friend and I decided we wanted to find a lookout point and headed toward one we knew was nearby. As we made our way to the point, we suddenly heard the sound of hooves. A white horse came galloping past us seemingly out of nowhere with a young woman on its back. It went by very quick, and we soon lost sight of it. We continued our way, and a little further ahead we saw a woman on the ground. Our first thought was that the woman had fallen off her horse and was injured. This woman was young and beautiful, but looked strange, like she was part serpent and part human and had a divine presence about her. I can't remember what happened next, but after what seemed like only 20 minutes of time, I noticed 2 or 3 hours had passed. The woman had disappeared, and I had no recollection of what had taken place in that missing time. Later, my friend and I guessed that the old woman, the horse, and the serpent woman on the trail were all the same being. Sure enough, there is an old Indian legend that shapeshifters and tricksters used to live in that area of Hidden Valley and Steep Rock. After these experiences, I seemed to have some type of knowledge and knew that whoever this being was, she wanted me to bring my friends to Steep Rock to meet them. The being and others like her were looking for specific human blood types. I vaguely remember some type of initiation this woman performed, wherein I was asked to drink a liquid or mist that enabled me to see things about their race. It turns out that the serpent woman is part of a very ancient race that once lived in the Hidden Valley area, but has since left. On occasion, I would go up to the hill with friends and we would meditate. The serpent people taught me how to communicate with them and leave our bodies. However, they told me that one person had to stay behind to make sure our bodies were safe. I had a great number of interdimensional experiences with these beings over the course of the next few months, but only remember vague details. I learned that these beings were shapeshifters who lived in another dimension in the Steep Rock Hidden Valley area a long time ago. In one communication experience, the serpent lady pointed to the position of the North Star, moved her arm to the left, and said, "When we lived here, it was over there." The serpent woman told me that her people's bodies were underground in a state of suspension and that most of them existed only spiritually. She said that there was an underground mound and passage leading to a burial chamber in the Hidden Valley that because of flooding was now accessible. She then asked me to bring buckets of water from the river to a particular location and leave them for another being to pick them up. She said I shouldn't stay to watch the entity that would appear to fetch the water because I would be frightened or confused by the way it looked, which might prove dangerous. I really didn't understand why the serpent woman wanted my help and what the buckets of water were for, but I obliged them nonetheless. After completing my chore, the serpent woman found me and told me that her people were attacked by an evil power a long time ago. Many died because these serpent people didn't defend themselves. It was their way. She told me this happened because the age changed and their protective force fields failed. She told me 30,000 of them used to live in Steep Rock and Hidden Valley. I strongly felt this particular being, who I later nicknamed the Divine Princess for some reason, was a guardian of the area, protecting the rest of her race who are sleeping. These shapeshifters came to our planets in ships from other worlds and became our ancient gods. An epic battle with a rival race took place, and the defeated serpent people fled to another dimension, ours, where they now dwell. She told me her people's stasis will end in 800 years. The Divine Princess pointed to the sky, indicating the constellation we call the Pleiades, and said that when conditions are right, a clear night with no frost or snow on the ground, they travel to that distant cluster of stars. The serpent people were able to reach out to me because of the things I experienced in the past. When I began hiking in the area, the Divine Princess saw that I was able to communicate with them, so they initiated contact with me. I think they had been waiting to speak with someone for a while, but I was the first one they found compatible. I know it sounds crazy, but everything I told you is true. I can't remember all of the experiences I had in Steep Rock. What I've mentioned here is just the tip of the iceberg. I wish there was some way to remember everything, but most of it is unclear. I now live in New York City and try to return to Steep Rock to hike and bring my friends to see what I experienced. In the winter of 2009, I was going to meet Bruce at Steep Rock and visit the location where he had his experiences, as the park and forest were not far from my home. Unfortunately, I never made it. My car wouldn't start. At first, I thought the problem was a dead battery, but the next day, the engine turned over just fine. I brought the car, still relatively new, to the dealer to have it checked out. They couldn't find anything wrong with the vehicle. The battery was in excellent shape. Was my car trouble a coincidence? Or did someone or something not want me at Steep Rock that day? I guess I'll never know for sure. In the late winter of 2009, Rosemary Ellen Gully and I paid a visit to Steep Rock and walked its trails for several hours. The landscape had a strange feeling to it, as if by walking it, one would become lost in time. The winding trails had a mystical look that could have been used for filming the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I plan to meet Bruce in the near future and revisit this very unique place.